All right. Hang on. Let me just wait for one other thing to kick in. There we go. We are live. Happy Friday, everybody. I am Christopher Lind, and this is the future-focused live Q&A. For those of you who have followed my stuff for a while, let me just give a quick breakdown because I'm changing things up a bit. If you followed me for long, you probably know I have a weekly podcast called Future Focused, hence the name. But one of the other things that I've been doing for a bit is a live Q&A, but that's been limited. And so last week I started experimenting, doing some multi-streaming with that. And so I'm going to continue that this week. The goal of this is to just answer some of the biggest follow-up questions that come through related to the topics from the podcast. Now, this is all going to change over the next couple of weeks because I'm actually changing up my whole content strategy. So if you follow my work, if you enjoy following my work, if you get benefit from it, I would encourage you to follow me, subscribe, whatever all that good stuff is. And then here's where it's going to go. And then I'll get into the questions for today for the sake of time. So pretty soon, starting in like 2 weeks, I'm going to do a deeper dive for my podcast, but shorten the overall length. So if you followed my podcast, it's about an hour covering several different topics. And I'm going to actually tighten that up, make it one topic, but go deeper into it and go a little bit further. So make that a little bit more digestible. My Substack reflection, where I go even deeper on that, will continue off of that. But my podcast is going to move to the beginning of the week. And then I'm going to keep the Q&A as a standing thing, but that's going to be at the end of the week. And I'm going to use that to be more of an open forum to take live Q&A, answer questions like that, and then make it really more general to some of the biggest things that I see where I can be a little more off the cuff and then answer your questions live. So more to come on that. If you didn't memorize all that, that's fine as well. You'll see how this all plays out over the coming weeks. But I'm actually live. If you've been following me on LinkedIn or YouTube for long, you know that sometimes when it says I'm live, it's pre-recorded. And I actually didn't like that. If I'm live, I want to be live so I can answer questions and things along the way. So I'll continue that. But let's get into it. If you didn't listen to the podcast, okay, this is not a recap of the podcast. This is a deeper dive based on some of the questions I've encountered from people along the way. And so if you want to know what the podcast had to say or what I had to say on the podcast, check that out. But just so you know what the topics were this week, I talked a lot about OpenAI's recent data that came out on how people are using ChatGPT and what that is. And that's going to be my article for next week. So you can check that out on Substack next week. But there's a lot of charts flying around social media based on this OpenAI research and this very colorful bar chart that everybody seems to be citing. And so if you want to hear my take on that and what I think everybody's missing, you can check that out. I also talked about Mark Zuckerberg, what I would call the MetaConnect flop. But I think there's more to it than just he flopped. I think there's a lot that can be taken from that. So you can check out the podcast where I shared some more on that. I've got a couple questions related to that. And then there's some concerning research coming out of MIT on the advancement, the rapid adoption of AI for romantic purposes in relationships. And so I had a take on that, but I'm going to answer some follow-up questions there. So those are the big three that I'll be covering today. But if you ask questions live, things like that, I will absolutely answer them and add those to the mix so you can see it. So the first one that came up, the first one I'm going to talk about is some of the things related to this OpenAI's ChatGPT usage data that's all over the place. This is how people are using AI. Yes and no. But the first question that came in was, if most people are skipping critical thinking when using AI, which I think that was indicated in how people are applying with it, are using AI. How can leaders practically build that discipline into team workflows? And I think this is a really important thing for any leader, any parent, anybody to be thinking about as you're interacting with people who we know now, based on the data, that a large majority of people are getting their insight and their information from AI, which by default does a lot of the thinking for you. And if you allow it to, it will happily do that. And so knowing that, as leaders, as somebody who, or even just a good friend, how do you build the discipline of critical thinking into things? One of the things I would add to this, or a good practice, is ask really thoughtful questions. This is something that I think a lot of times we just don't do enough of. when we're talking with people, when we hear them say things, they send us next week, just as a preview, one of the things I'm going to talk about is workplace slop, which is becoming a major problem in the workplace now. But a lot of what happens is stuff that gets sent out or people say, people just either take it or reject it. And that's actually the worst thing you can do to try and reinforce and encourage critical thinking from people, is to just take what they say or ignore what they say. Either way, it's not helpful, because not only are you challenging people to think, are you not challenging people to think critically about things? Hey, everybody joining in. By not asking follow-up questions, you're not only allowing them to just accept what AI told them, you're also not challenging them to use their brain power. You're not challenging people to actually understand the things they're parroting or saying or anything like that. And that's really unfortunate. And this is very problematic. It's popping up in all the AI data everywhere. There's been research done on the effect of AI on cognitive decay and what it's doing. And one of the most powerful things anybody can do is ask follow-up questions. If somebody tells you something, if somebody presents something, now, especially at work, people are using AI to generate their PowerPoints and all this stuff. I mean, okay, if you just sit there and take it, listen, move on with it, or reject it, you're not actually challenging that person to think critically. And that's one of the things. Now, I want to add a caveat to this. Okay, this isn't about interrogating everybody you encounter. Okay, that is not what I mean. I'm not suggesting if somebody has something to say, you immediately fire into like 9,000 questions at them and be highly skeptical. We got enough conspiratorial thinking going on in the world right now. We don't need more of that nonsense. So I'm not suggesting be conspiratorial and suspicious of everybody. I'm saying be thoughtful, listen, and ask questions to understand deeper. And that kind of behavior not only opens the floor for people to have healthy dialogue, but it actually creates space where you're challenging people to think. Because we all do it. We all think things, we say things that we haven't really thought through yet. And we don't even realize we haven't thought them through until somebody asks us a question and goes, what do you mean by that? Or how does this line up with this type of a thing? And there are hidden patterns that you can look for when people are talking to see, like, do you actually think this, or are you just like repeating talking points that you read from a headline? But the goal isn't to like embarrass or out them. The goal is to actually engage them in dialogue, and hopefully, it might embarrass them a little bit, but hopefully it helps them then go back and say, hey, I probably should think through things a little bit more. So that would be my best advice if you're trying to encourage critical thinking in others, is ask thoughtful, meaningful questions, but don't do it in a way where you're being a jerk. Don't be a jerk. We got enough people being jerks to people for the sake of being jerks. We don't need more of that crap. Okay, so question 2 was, how did I see this research aligning with my AI effectiveness rating framework? So going back to the research from OpenAI's ChatGPT usage, one of my big concerns is that we're seeing people asking questions and asking it to do stuff. They're getting information, then asking AI to do things. And I think that's concerning, because what we're not seeing is people actually engaging with, having dialogue with AI. That's extremely problematic. So how does it align? If you don't know me, I run a consulting practice, and one of the tools I have is called the AI effectiveness rating. And what it is it's a tool where people engage with it, and then it helps them get a basically score on how well they're using it. Well, let me know how that one goes for you, Jumbo. So comment came in, 27, never use AI. Haven't used AI, never will. You probably actually have, just maybe not the way you think. Maybe not the way you think you have. AI is everywhere. We're breathing and swimming in it. So the fact you're joining me on social media means you're using AI. Just maybe not in a sense of Gen AI products. But anyway, sorry for the distraction. So anyway, I have this tool that assesses like, hey, how well do you actually use AI effective? Do you use it effectively? And the patterns I'm seeing in the work I'm doing actually are extremely consistent with what I'm seeing with both Anthropic and OpenAI's research around how people are engaging. Lots of people asking questions, they're getting information, and then they're asking AI to just take and do stuff. But when it gets into that, even going back to my first question of like, how do you encourage critical thinking? When I do assessments, or if you look in any of this data, you're not necessarily seeing people like critically wrestling through what AI is telling them. They're not, if it presents them with information, they're not going, how did you come to that conclusion? Why did you, I did a comic this week that I posted on LinkedIn where, it's like two people sitting in a conference room. And it's like, how did we come to this conclusion? Well, AI told us. Should we ask it the conclusion it came to? And that's missing a lot. And the reality is AI is wrong a lot. It's wrong a lot. It's gathering information from all sorts of sources. It's designed to give you what it thinks you want. And it's also designed to basically take everything down to the collective average. So with that kind of approach, you're not going to get the nuance and complexity out of it. So yes, the tool that I have is actually very consistent. And I was actually really encouraged when I saw both Anthropic and OpenAI's research kind of validating that, yeah, okay, it's not just me. I'm not just engaging with people and finding these patterns. We're seeing this on a large scale across two of the biggest frontier AI platforms. Okay, so this next one I think is actually kind of funny. So the report categories, which if you look up ChatGPT or OpenAI's research on ChatGPT usage, you'll see these columns. There's like writing, guidance, info seeking, technical, something. And anyway, and so the question was, how should we interpret this kind of research without falling into the trap of oversimplification? It's a fair question. And I think this is one of the things we just have to be careful of, that I would encourage anybody to be careful of when you hear anything that says research says. Like, which research, according to who, what are the limitations of said research and other things. So you can go pretty deep with it, but also, and I think that's the problem with the oversimplification is sometimes we just hear things and you'll hear MIT research says, Stanford research, and it's like, okay, there's a lot of garbage coming out of all these institutions, just because is it peer review, like all this stuff. But I think the one thing I would say, so first of all, one, just basic step, if you see anything that says research says, go look at the research yourself. Like, actually go find it and see if you can dig into it. I'm not saying you have to read every single 87-page research document. It's very dry. But once you get the hang of it, it's actually not that hard to figure out like what's actually in here. And even if you just look specifically for the cited statistic in the research to go, where is that? And like, what else is surrounding it? And what else is in here? And the other thing I tell people all the time is immediately go to the bottom of any research and look if it has the word limitations. Look if there's a section on limitations. If it doesn't, that should be a red flag. Okay, that should be a red flag in terms of when you're looking at research. If it does not acknowledge its own limitations and does not say, hey, we did this research, but here is where our research is limited, that should concern you, because all research is limited. It should be focused on a specific thing, and it should recognize that within that certain thing, there are limitations to what conclusions you can draw. If it does not have that, you should ask the question, so what are you trying to accomplish with this research if you are not taking that into consideration? So I think that's an important part. But the one thing I would add to this question that was asked, like, how do you not oversimplify the research? I think that's important. And I think you can overcomplicate research sometimes. And that's actually what I saw with this ChatGPT usage research was this one stupid chart. It's not a stupid chart. I take that back. It's not a stupid chart, but it's this chart that says like, here's specifically how people are using ChatGPT. And the number of threads and meetings arguing and debating like, well, what does this category specifically mean? That's not consistent. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It's saying people are asking for information. It's saying they're using it for this. Sometimes you just need to say, this is all there is. Like, this is all there is to the research. I don't need to go further. I think we actually sometimes get ourselves into a lot more trouble when we speculate on, well, what does this research mean? Like, I'm going to draw my own conclusions based on this. That's where we get into really big trouble. is when we overinterpret things. And there have been many times I've seen research used, and the researchers themselves would say, that's not what we said. Like we don't even stand behind that. So I think when it comes to research in general, it's kind of a twofold thing. One, be mindful and careful of, don't oversimplify and, write things off without really kind of looking into it. Make sure you're kind of digging in and understanding, things like limitations. What were the, conditions in terms of the study? What were they actually researching? That's another big miss. People will draw conclusions about research that the research wasn't even actually researching. It doesn't mean you can't find patterns, but then you got to take those patterns and go, now we need to research those patterns. You can't just go, hey, this anecdotal stuff came up in this research, therefore it must mean this. It's like, no, if you weren't studying that, you can't necessarily draw that conclusion. But at the same time, I've been in more executive meetings where people are arguing over a chart that was in some MIT research or came out of Harvard Business Review. And it's like, pretty sure all this is saying is this. We're done. Like, we can move on here. Okay. All right. So let's transition to the topic of Zuckerberg and the MetaConnect event, which, depending on who you talk to, it was either the greatest thing you've ever seen, it was a complete flop and an embarrassment to the future of technology and Zuckerberg as a whole. And then you had lots of people in the middle. One of the questions I got was, what leadership lessons should executives take from Zuckerberg's failed live demos beyond just don't demo live? I will first say, I would clarify and not walk away from what happened at MetaConnect as a universal indication that you should never demo things live. Okay, I actually don't think I would never just kind of go, oh, he flopped, therefore you shouldn't ever demo tech live because it's problematic and things, come into play. I don't think that's the case. So I would be cautious of even that. I would say you really need to engage and consider, like, what is the audience? What are we really trying to do here? Like, do I necessarily think, given the goal was to really convince people of wearable AI technology that's going to transform and make your life more convenient, that people are already a little bit skeptical of? Like, was a live demo necessarily the best place to show people the possibilities? I don't know that I would have done it that way, but anyway. But I would say the big thing is, universally, don't just assume you should never do demos live. I think it's more about understanding the audience and the purpose that you're trying to accomplish. But in terms of leadership lessons, as much as Zuckerberg's can be kind of awkward, I genuinely really appreciated how he just kind of rolled with it when everything, didn't work. When literally everything didn't work. He could have just lost his cool. He could have flipped out. He could have blown a gasket. He could have done a lot of things. And yeah, he was a little awkward, which, I mean, good grief, you're in that many people and it's this big of a publicized event. I think anybody would be a little shaken when literally every demo you didn't go according to plan. But I think, he handled it as well as one could expect. Now, what he does behind the scenes, I think the leadership lesson we can't necessarily take unless we actually know how he responded to those teams after the fact. I would say a leadership lesson, they should have done a post-mortem. If they didn't do a post-mortem on, hey, like, what happened at MetaConnect? Like, let's talk about what didn't go well, why it didn't go well, what we could learn from this, and how we might be able to improve going forward to make sure things like that don't happen in an environment where it's not a, firing squad. I think that could be a leadership lesson. When these kind of failures happen, they happen. We've all done it. I mean, everybody's done some big thing. I remember I had a huge keynote once where in the middle of it, the whole tech went down and it caused me to just have a complete brain blip. Like, I didn't even remember who I was or what. Like, I just totally fried. It happens. And so I think a leadership lesson from that is okay, well, so then after it happens, like, discuss it. Identify, was this just, geez, we made some stupid mistakes, like, or not? Was it even mistakes, or was it just, hey, things are unpredictable, and eliminate those possibilities, but do it in a growth mindset where it's like, okay, things happened. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out, is there things we could have done differently? Is there not? Let's plan for that in the future, and then let's move on. Like, let's not do that. I think the worst thing you can do is just start tearing into people when things go unaccording to plan. And I don't have enough details to know how Zuck, responded after the fact. I know everybody was speculating, oh, these people are going to lose their jobs. What it's like, maybe not. I don't know him, and I don't think it's really helpful to make assumptions about how things went. But I think that's a big lesson learned that executives should take, is just do a postmortem, even if things go really well. Because that's another one. People tend to only do these postmortems and reflections when things hit the fan and everything blows up and goes sideways. I actually don't think that's helpful. I mean, even if things go well, it's really easy when things go well to go, yeah, it was so great because we just did such an amazing job and blah, blah, blah. Like, maybe you just got really lucky and everybody was in a good mood that day and the tech worked flawlessly and you were saying what people already wanted to hear. If you didn't get any dissenting comments, that should be a point of reflection. Like, if nobody challenged anything you said, that is something worth examining and going, is it because we created an environment where people didn't feel comfortable speaking up? Is it because nobody wants to actually tell us the truth? Or is it because we actually are on track? Like, you should at least pause and do that. And don't just do it when every tech demo fails or when you have a catastrophic fallout. Like, do it if it goes well. And don't just do the rah, do cheers and what. Like, you can still identify, like, hey, we got lucky. This went well. I think in the future we could have done this, because maybe your event went flawless, but the poor people responsible for the event didn't sleep for 72 hours before the event. And maybe they have something to say on, like, yeah, it went really well, but in hindsight, it would have been really great if we weren't making changes 3 minutes before we went live on the event. That would be something that maybe would reduce the risk. And I think that gets missed. When things go well, everybody just thinks like, hurrah, everything was perfect. And it's you screwed up. There's things you missed. So that's what I would say about that. Those are the biggest ones that come to mind for me. Okay. In the podcast this week, I did mention you are the product, not AI, with AI companies. And I think it's a really important reflection, especially with some of this wearable tech. This is honestly one of my biggest watch outs for people when they get really excited about augmented reality glasses and like, oh, it's going to be so cool. We can walk around and have screens plastered to our faces. And I'm like, maybe. But there's also a growing trend of people recognizing the harm of being constantly connected. So really, like, right in your face all the time. But on top of that, then this whole idea that, of course, the AI companies and the tech companies want you wearing their product always on, cameras recording, AI consuming every conversation around you. That is, you getting benefit out of that is a happy accident. That's not by design. Nobody's in a room going, what people love? The idea of having a camera recording and listening to everything they're doing, wherever they are, whenever they're wearing our product. That is what people are asking for. They want that. They love the idea of possibly being surveilled in a massive AI system everywhere they look. They want to be suspicious of every person wearing glasses. They want to do a tech check when people come to their house. Like, nobody wants that. So when tech companies are spinning it as this is for your benefit, as I watched Meta Connect and Zuckerberg's talking about, like, it'll be so great. Like, imagine you're on a bike ride and you can be live streaming your bike ride instead of looking at the environment, I'm like, oh, come on, this is marketing spin. Now, I'm not saying there's no use for it. And if you listen to the podcast, I did talk about the fact I actually see tremendous benefit and value coming from augmented glasses. I did some really powerful work at GE around using that kind of technology to transform things. So it's tremendously powerful. I don't want to diminish it and just say, augmented glasses are stupid. No, they're actually extremely powerful. And the merging of immersive and augmented tech coming together is actually something probably for the last, I don't know, many years I've said we got to get to that point before we really start to accelerate it. So some of these new glasses that came out, I think the form factor we're getting to is actually demonstrating they are going to carry a lot more value. I just don't think the way it's being represented. So anyway, but how should new leaders? The question was, how do new leaders balance tech like wearables with protecting privacy and trust? So as an example, if you're in a company and, they start, I'll give an example of an organization I did some work with. They were rolling out VR headsets. Okay. And one of the things they discovered when they did this was just how uncomfortable certain people, and I don't want to stereotype, certain people were with being in this immersive environment where they can't really see their environment around them. And we're very uncomfortable with, like, I don't like that people are watching and looking at me and I can't see them and I can't tell what they're doing. I don't like how I feel with all this other stuff. And so I think the thing to be cautious of as a leader, if you're investing in any new technology, whether it's AI, whether it's, wearable devices, whether it's anything, is one, being transparent about what you're trying to accomplish it and creating space for people to share their concerns. I think a lot of times we don't make room, even going back to what I said in my first question, with critical thinking, we don't make space for people to share honestly and openly about how they're feeling or what they're struggling with and talking through those things, sharing their hesitations, their concerns. And I think especially with wearable technology, if all of a sudden you show up at work and your company hands you a set of Meta Ray-Bans and says, you need to wear these at all time moving forward. Terrible, terrible job on the change management. Now, I know we're not doing that yet, but there will likely come a day where that will be kind of what happens. You're issued your company phone and your company headset, and how you set expectations, how the discomfort people have, things like that. You just got to make room and space for it. And I think it's also important that employees have more visibility into what companies are doing with their data. Now, I know a lot of times companies keep this pretty secretive. I was on a call this week where I brought up how, I remember what it was. I was giving a keynote talking about how to get the most out of AI and what you can do to use it for your own growth and development. And I brought up the fact that, all your meetings that your company on any sort of company device are all being transcribed and recorded. And so you can use that for your growth and development. And somebody, shared some of their concerns and kind of freak out moment. I think it was the first time they realized that was what's happening. And I think it's unfortunate that many companies just don't be more open and honest with what they're doing or not doing. Even if it is you're a company, you've got Copilot, running in the background, or your Office 365 or Google Workspace capturing all this data. If you're not doing anything with it and have no plans to, just tell your employees that. Tell them straight up, yes, it's there. It's not something we have any plans. Should that change, we will let you know. If you're rolling out AI glasses or something like that, make sure you tell people what they're doing, and don't do it in a bad way. I know someone who their company recently, it's not necessarily directly these like AI glasses, but they're installing AI cameras in their trucks. He's a truck driver. They're installing these AI cameras in their trucks. And basically the way he found out about it was he got assigned a compliance training course that to complete the course, you had to consent to them recording you the whole time whenever you're in the truck. And that's just a terrible way to do it. So I think as a leader, that's a really important thing to take into consideration, whether it's wearables, any sort of new transformative tech, is don't just drop it on people, especially with a big brother, notification in a compliance training. Like, good grief. You want to unnecessarily freak people out. That's a great way to do it. Okay. Question 6. So I talked about the fact Meta's doubling down on these glasses despite a lot of the consumer indications that this isn't really what people are asking for. I don't know that there's a lot of people asking for more smart device notifications plastered to their face, to be connected 24/7 all the time. I don't know that that's a huge need. People are saying, can we get more of that, please? I also just know people are very resistant to glasses in general. I mean, even think about the fact people who need glasses to see better a lot of times don't want to wear glasses. So, plastering a big clunky piece of hardware onto your face, it makes for a good YouTube video, but it's not necessarily something people are super eager for. So the question was, what does that tell us about the risks of letting vision override reality? Because I did share that a little bit, that one of the things I see in Zuckerberg sometimes is, we saw this when he was going big on VR and things like that, was he sometimes let his personal vision, what he loves, get in the way of what people actually are wanting and asking for. Now, I think that's a real risk. Okay. And we're all vulnerable to it. If we don't surround ourselves with a diverse audience of people who actually feel comfortable telling you what they actually think, you will do this for sure. You will think something's a great idea. And if you only surround yourself with people who agree with you and don't feel comfortable challenging you, then you're going to have your vision overshadow things. I am so thankful for some of the people in my life who I've gone, I'm thinking of doing this. And they go, yeah, look, I mean, maybe you want to go there, but this is a terrible idea. And here's why. I appreciate those people. Not necessarily that it forces me to not do it. It just forces me to think more about it. And so, as I think about the risk of letting vision override reality, I think it does show us we need people who can help us with this. Because quite frankly, if I was on Zuckerberg's advisory panel, I would say, I think it's brilliant what you're doing with hardware. I think one of the challenges is you're trying to go for kind of the consumer market first with a really niche, quirky product instead of really zoning in on like enterprise. I think there's far more practical use for enterprise connected glasses than there is for, just everyday use. And maybe he would say, screw that. I'm going to do it anyway because I've got the agreements with Ray-Ban and Oakley, and it's going to be easier to, get the deals with this. I mean, okay. But I think having those people in your life who can challenge you and push you is really important so that you don't let your vision override reality. I think we're going to see some real risks, and we saw it with even the Meta Quest. I remember when the Quest was going to change the world, and I bought them all for my team so we could experiment with them, and they weren't that expensive. And within a few weeks, we kind of were like, I see some real value to these in specific use cases. Are people going to be walking around with Meta Quests on their face anytime soon? No. And I think that's something that is important to do really diverse testing, bring diverse voices, and then create an environment where people will tell you not only that they think your idea sucks, but why they think it sucks. Because maybe you'll hear why they think it sucks and you go, okay, this is a misunderstanding of what this is. You're not quite getting the vision yet. You're not seeing it the same. Sometimes they're literally telling you your idea sucks and you shouldn't do it, type of a thing. Like if somebody came to me now and went, what I want to do is go big on resurrecting Blockbuster Video as a video store. I mean, unless you're really planning on doing it as like a niche, crazy, quirky thing. Okay. But if you're trying to take on Netflix with that strategy, like then I wouldn't understand it. And I think that's the thing with like the connected glasses. If somebody came to me and said, what do you think about these for consumers? I'd be like, I don't know that you're going to see that kind of adoption. If somebody came and said, hey, we really want to get these into the enterprise in manufacturing as a way to support, engineering teams and manufacturing teams, I'd be like, okay, well, now we're talking, type of a thing. So there you go. That's my thought on that one. Let's see. All right. So let's shift to the third topic, which was MIT's AI romance research. Here's another perfect example of a research study that I would absolutely caution people to take with not a grain of salt, but just be aware of it. So yes, MIT did some research on people and romantic relationships, and it is all over the headlines in terms of what it found. However, if you go to that research and go straight to the bottom and go to limitations, you will quickly see even they acknowledge the limitations of it. One of the biggest being, look, like this is based on Reddit data. So let's just also recognize this is already based on a subculture, a specific audience, a niche of that. So when you hear statistics like 20% of people have engaged romantically with AI, does that necessarily mean 1 in 5 people have had an AI romantic partner? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think the researchers would even acknowledge that. But the question came through is like, what is the leadership takeaway here? Which a big part of what I'm always trying to do is apply this stuff from these fringe, like, oh my gosh, MIT says people are falling in love with AI bots, which they are. We can't pretend that that's not here. And I think a leadership takeaway from that is sometimes we hear these kind of weird outside, or what seems weird outside the box stuff, and we immediately just dismiss it. And as a leader, that's like the worst thing you can do is go, what you just said sounds weird to me, so therefore I've decided it's nonsense. I'm just debunking whatever you said simply because it doesn't fit into my mold. And yeah, there's lots of people already who are like mocking some of this data on the rise of AI romantic relationships as, oh, that's so stupid and fringe, and it's only weirdos and basement dwellers that do this. And I'm like, really? Like, seriously? Like, you can't just write that stuff off. So I think that's a leadership takeaway, is to actually be willing to listen to things that you may be really uncomfortable with. Maybe you don't want to believe it. Maybe the idea of it repels or repulses you a bit. And so you're like, I don't actually even want to hear that. Well, maybe you don't, but maybe you need to, so that you can at least take it into consideration. I think the other leadership takeaway, though, specific to this, isn't necessarily like, oh, do you need to worry about like, well, one thing I did say, I actually said this a couple of weeks ago. I am seeing an increase in CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and CIOs, Chief Information Officers, having to evaluate the fact that people are doing not safe for work things with corporate AI tools because they think they're flying under the radar. They aren't necessarily going to a not safe for work website. They're using a tool, but they're using it in a way like that. So I think that is a leadership takeaway. I mean, be mindful of it, I guess, as a leader. But I think the bigger one has to do with emotional attachment. And this is a real thing that every business leader, every, parent, every whatever, has to take into consideration, is that more and more people are starting to develop emotional bonds and relationships with AI. And you can't just go, nuh-uh, like, or those aren't real. Like, no, they are real, and it's happening, and it's causing a lot of problems. And you may go, well, that's outside of work, so I don't need to worry about that. That's actually not true, especially given all the hype and noise right now in organizations where it's like, AI is your new coworker. Okay, well, if you're telling people AI is their new coworker, people form emotional bonds with their coworkers. So if you're telling people they need to treat their AI tool like their new coworker, given the anthropomorphic nature of AI, they are going to develop emotional bonds with their coworkers. And that means things like, hey, we're switching from Gemini to, Copilot. These now have real implications on the emotional well-being of your employees, because this thing you just told, it's like firing a team member now and bringing along another one and going, here's your new coworker. I mean, there's going to be real grief and loss. And we saw this. This isn't just Christopher speculating on this. Look at what happened when ChatGPT 4.0 moved over to 5. There literally were people crashing out as though they'd lost a loved one. And I don't say that like jokingly. Like, there were real emotional bonds that people had formed with AI. And the same thing is going to happen in the workplace, where people are going to become personally connected with their AI tools. And so what does that mean as a leader? It means you're going to need to be more in tune with the emotional health of the people around you. You're going to need to be paying attention for warning signals and signs, and you're going to need to be engaging. I think as a leader, it means all the more reason to encourage human to human team building activities within your teams. Like, make sure, because one of the things that I pointed out that this research is also pointing to that I'm already starting to see trickle in organizations all over the place. It's not trickling. It's like freaking Hoover Dam blew open. Is everybody's operating in a silo now. It's like, well, why would I go talk to my coworker? I've got my AI friend. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. I kind of liked 402. But anyway, I'm already seeing this. So like the Hoover Dam kind of blasted out and people really were struggling with this. And so you have to be emotionally in tune. And if anything, as leaders, we need to be spending more time being intentional about creating space for people to build emotional bonds with other human beings, to connect them with each other. Because if we don't, we're going to have all these silos of people all working independently, and they're extremely fragile and vulnerable when they do that. Not only is it terrible for business performance, I mean, companies spend billions of dollars trying to break down organizational silos, to try and encourage more cross-functional collaboration and engagement. And now we're completely doing a reversal of that by going, here, everybody, here's a tool that can do the job of everybody in the company. So you don't need to ask anybody for help. And then we're wondering why people are doing everything and then sending this workplace slop, which is going to become the trending hashtag for the next few weeks, all over. And it's just making an absolute mess. So I think just on a purely emotional standpoint, one, you need to watch out for this yourself, because one of the things that came out of this MIT research that everybody should be paying attention to is 40% of the people that ended up in a romantic relationship with AI had zero plans. It was like something they were completely opposed to. It was not on their radar whatsoever. And then just through regular engagement, they slowly built an emotional bond. Next thing they knew, it was beyond just like a helpful AI assistant. And so I'm not saying that, be scared to engage with AI because you're going to fall in love with it. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but you do need to keep your guard up, because you will start to build an emotional bond with an anthropomorphic tool if you are not consciously and actively paying attention to it, and just being consistent with that, or careful of that. So that's I think one of the biggest leadership takeaways, or some of the biggest ones that come to mind for me. So question 8 related to the podcast that came through was, I talked about in the podcast that there's a hang on, before I get to this one, I do want to acknowledge this one, because this is very true. So a comment came in, we don't learn. People were warned of social media, privacy, and repair going away. Everyone rolled their eyes. Exactly. We don't learn from history, and history just continues to repeat itself. We know what happens with some of this stuff, and we saw it with social media, and we are feeling the pain of that, now 20 years later. I mean, we've been feeling it for longer than that, but now take into consideration the fact that AI moves everything faster along the continuum, and all the research is showing this. So this same kind of pain is going to be amplified and accelerated. We're not going to have to wait decades to start seeing the research blow up. The fact we're only 3 years in and research is blowing up all over the place. I can tell you 3 years after Facebook launched, we were not seeing research reports coming out about this stuff. It was happening, but not to the level where it was causing the kind of chaos that we're already seeing. So anyway, it's a really great point, and I think we do need to learn from this kind of stuff. Okay, but the question was, so if there's stigma around people admitting to AI romance, and there totally is, because I'm so open and talk with people, and I've had people come to me and go, Christopher, I'm falling into this, and I don't feel like I can talk to anybody because I feel like I'll be laughed out of the room. I don't feel like people will even understand what I'm doing, and they'll just immediately cast me out. And I think that's really unfortunate, because that's actually part of the problem. I think AI romances are accelerating at the pace they are, is even when people start to see it happening, or if a friend comes and engages, people freak out about it because it's so stigmatized. So the question was, how do we really gauge the scale of this trend, and how do we interpret self-reported data? Fair question. I think, first of all, self-reported data, you just have to understand it's going to be lower than it is. I will say that right now. With something especially as stigmatized as this, there are more people engaging in romantic relationships with AI than are going to admit. This is going to be one because of the stigma around it, just because of how taboo it is, and just what we know about people talking openly about anything related to romance and, not safe for work type stuff. People get a little like queasy about it. So already people are hesitant to be open about it. Now you throw AI into the mix, you're not going to get nearly as many people who have experimented with AI for romance admitting to it. So just assume the number's lower. And I think that's something we need to, recognize. So whatever number you're seeing, unless the report just has grossly exaggerated it, right? But like assume it's probably bigger. I think the other thing is it's less about what is the specific percentage. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes frustrates me when people react to research, is going back to a question I answered earlier of not just oversimplifying, but overcomplicating. People will debate, is it really 20%? Is it really 1 in 5 people who are engaging with AI romantically? Or is it more like 1 in 10? Who cares? Like, who cares? It's still a sizable percentage of people. It's happening. We know that this has real risks. Like, it doesn't matter if it's 10% or 20%. And sometimes we get so focused on this, on hairline fractures, when it's like, okay, come on. It's something we need to recognize is a risk. So we should be mindful of it in ourselves and watching out for it for others. Watch out for patterns of addiction in the people close to you when it comes to AI. Will they not even engage with you without asking their AI, companion a question first? Like, can they still engage? Like, if not, have a conversation with them, not to condemn them, but like invite them into a conversation. That's the thing with this is, I think sometimes gauging the scale, sometimes I see two reactions to it when it comes to gauging the scale. And this is just like an honest reflection I think anybody can have is, are you asking, how do you gauge the scale of this so you can dismiss it? Or are you asking how to gauge the scale so you can ring an alarm bell and freak out about it and try and, chicken little the world about it? If you're doing either one of those, you're asking the wrong question. If you're genuinely seeking to gauge the scale to go, hey, what should I do? Should I make this a really big priority, or is this something that, is maybe still kind of emerging? Just ask that question first. And I think that's a really important piece. But the reality is, when it comes to, and this is my biggest takeaway on the MIT AI research on romance, is people are more and more rapidly accelerating in falling in love with AI. Sounds weird to even say it, but it's what's happening. And yes, you're seeing all different scales of how far it goes. I mean, yes, people are literally getting wedding pictures taken or AI generated wedding pictures made of them and their companions and doing all this stuff. Yes, those things are happening. Are those maybe more on the far end? Sure. But on the more realistic end, people are getting a lot of their emotional support from an AI tool. Now you might go, well, that's technically not romance. Okay. But if you're finding your emotional connection in an AI tool that literally could vaporize or change overnight, that's making you extremely vulnerable. And you should take that seriously and recognize you're at risk, but so are the people around you. So instead of worrying about, well, is technically 1 in 5 people experimenting with AI romance or 1 in 10? Who cares? People are, it's rapidly growing. That's the other thing the data showed, is it's rapidly growing in adoption. As it becomes less stigmatized, people are going to say, see, it's, totally fine. Let me be me. And in some ways, I understand where they're coming from, but that doesn't mean you don't share the risks and say, hey, that you're potentially playing with fire. And some of the thing I thought that was a little bit disappointing, but the limitations acknowledged it. So it's not that the research said this, but it didn't come through in the research, and it sure as heck did not come through in the headlines. The MIT AI romance research said that current state, right now, from what we can tell, the damage being done by these AI romantic relationships is minimal. Okay, that's what they're saying. People are finding companionship, they're finding support, they're getting benefits out of it, and therefore, currently they're not seeing a lot of high risk damage indicators. First of all, there was no data on what do you mean by risk? What are we talking about? Do we consider dependency risk? Do we consider, the vulnerability of that model changing overnight and the emotional trauma people will go through? Are we considering that, or not? But also there's no longitudinal data on this. And so this Gen AI stuff has only been around for less than 3 years. Okay. People really didn't start adopting it like in regular use. People were tinkering with it, but really the wide scale adoption didn't happen until even more recently than that. So a year, probably, 2 years, maybe for some of the early adopters. Think about a relationship in general. Okay. How many crap relationships have you been in that seemed like they were going fine for a year or two? Right? I mean, everybody's had a really dysfunctional relationship that was smooth sailing for the first year or two, and then it went off the rails and about destroyed you. And so we just have to even think in terms of human psychology and human emotional development and the way we think about things, like saying, hey, people have picked up AI romantic relationships. I'm not seeing anybody going crazy. Well, first of all, we have lots of use cases where actually, yes, we do. People are getting really seriously hurt as a result of this, some even dying and taking their own lives. And we can't just deny those and go, well, those are extreme cases. Okay, but they're happening. So we can't say there's no risk. And two, it takes time for a relationship to go really bad. And I will share one tragic example of this that still just bothers me to this day. It's one of the reasons I tell people, stay the heck away from ghost bots. I know someone who lost their longtime spouse, and they had an AI version of them created to, help support them through the grief stage. It was like a way of not letting go. And I was very concerned about it, type of a thing. And this ghost bot, things were fine for a bit. It was just this handy little way to hear this person's voice and, kind of be reminded of some of the things they said, and it sounded like they did. And then it turned and things went sideways. And when it did, it not only really damaged this person, but it also damaged the entire memory of what they had with this other person. Now, I know this isn't necessarily related to AI romance, but this was a continuation of a real romance. This person had a romance with the person, their life. It was their spouse. Then they passed away, and they tried to sustain the relationship with AI. That is AI romance. Okay. It did not go well, but it took time for that to happen. And I think that's one of the things that this study does not highlight, is just because in general, people self-reportedly say that they're happy, they're getting something good out of this, does not mean it's good and that, there's no risks to worry about or things that we shouldn't be taking into consideration. And I think that's one of the things when it comes to AI, research on this and what we're seeing. Okay. What risks, question 9, what risks do you see for families and communities if AI companionship continues to rise? And how does this tie back to broader patterns you're seeing in AI adoption? So families and communities, here's the thing. I will continue saying this. I will say this, till I'm 6 feet under. AI is an amplifier. It amplifies everything it touches, faster, more furious than anything we've ever seen. So, okay, now what I think we're going to see happen is people are going to blame AI, and to be fair, there's some things the AI companies could be doing to mitigate these risks. Totally acknowledge that. But we're going to be quick to blame AI for fractures, complete breakdowns of families and communities as AI companionship continues to rise. We're going to see this in marriages. We're going to see this in this, where people are turning to AI. I might talk about it next week, some stuff that's coming up related to this, but we're going to start to see this stuff happen. And our default reaction is going to be to point at AI and go, see, AI's at fault families, marriages, communities, they're falling apart because of AI. Yes, there's truth in that. And AI is amplifying and accelerating what's there. So, is there a world? Let me illustrate what I mean by this. Okay. If you suck at communicating, and the way you communicate with someone is you are just out to win, you just want to defeat them, you just want to be right. And so you treat another human being like they're just a conquest to be defeated. That's it. And that's the way you communicate with them. Every time they disagree with you, your goal is just to win. And you're fine so long as they agree with you. Okay, terrible relationship. But is that relationship probably going to last, or is it going to be a healthy one? No. So is it at some point probably going to erode and fracture and things like that going to happen? Yes. Yeah, it probably will. If you pour AI on that, and now you have someone that really just wants to win the conversation and dominate anybody they encounter who doesn't agree with them, is AI going to make them better at doing that? You better believe it will, because it's going to be getting coaching and feedback, and every response that they get, they can feed it in there, and they're going to be quick on their feet, and they're going to be able to hammer down everything and pull in whatever research and nonsense they can from the entire power of the internet to win. And is that relationship going to fracture and implode much faster? You better believe it. And is the damage going to be that much worse? Yes, because now not only were you a complete jerk and ruined that person and the relationship you have with them, they know you did it, and you just used AI to do it. And they go, wow, that really speaks to how little you cared about me. Like, you didn't even care to engage in a conversation with me. You let AI do it. Conversely, if you actually care about understanding someone, and when you're engaging with somebody, you have a habit of getting impatient, not listening to understand, and you have this habit of just jumping down on people, and you want to fight against that so you can actually seek to listen and understand. Could AI help you process what you're going through and help you hear what you may not be hearing? Could it help you maybe soften your words? Maybe you have a habit of saying things really intensely, really harshly, and you go, I don't know how to speak any differently. Like, this is how I would respond. Well, AI can go, you can ask it, you can go, here's what I would say. Is there a way I can soften this so it doesn't sound like I'm being a complete jerk? And AI can help you with that. And that can actually strengthen the relationship. So when I see things like, is AI going to destroy families, marriages, and communities? I absolutely think it will. But I think the root problem underneath that is the people within those relationships and communities and how they're choosing to use AI to do it, not necessarily AI itself. And I will just say that does not mean that the AI companies are immune from responsibility and accountability. I think there's more that they can be doing to mitigate that risk. So I think both can be true. But that's kind of my take on that. So but we're in for some really hard times, and the data is proving it. The data is showing we are way down this track right now. All right, final question, and then I'll wrap it up here. So looking across the OpenAI study, Meta's flop, and MIT research, what are common threads leaders should be paying attention to if they don't want to miss the point? I'll try and answer this. This could probably be like an hour talk just on this topic, but let me share one of the biggest things that I think is everybody can be doing to not miss the point right now. We are so immersed in a culture that is obsessed with going really fast, not considering the implications of what we're doing, seeing more as better inherently. And anybody who disagrees or doesn't see things exactly the way I do is an enemy to be defeated. They are an obstacle to be overcome. They are an enemy to be defeated. Those three things are catastrophic. Having those three ingredients in any sort of recipe is a recipe for disaster. And I see that coming through in OpenAI's study. I see it in the Meta research, or the Meta, Connect flop, and I see it in the MIT research. We're not thinking clearly. We're just going, and we're not stopping and slowing down and seeking to understand. We're just reacting to everything. And that was true in all of them. If you think about the OpenAI study, people are asking questions and they're asking AI to do it for them. They're not pausing and going, what did I just get? Like, what does this actually mean? Is it even accurate? in the Meta, Connect flop. It's just like these glasses. We're going to do this. We're going to go out there. We're going to show everybody how amazing it is. And it didn't go according to plan. And the AI romance, it's, hey, this romantic thing I'm forming with AI is great. And what could possibly go wrong? And it's meeting my needs by giving me what I want. And that's really all I care about. And I'm sure it'll be fine in the end. And right, all these things are coming. And anybody who says anything otherwise in all three of these, if you say anything otherwise, you're just a hater. What? That kind of stuff is probably what I would say to anything. That's a common thread that I'm seeing throughout these that we all need to be paying attention to. And you don't just need to be, a leader in the traditional sense of, do you have a team? Do you run an organization? Do you have a big title? Do you have a huge following on social media? It's not just that. We're all leaders in some capacity, in the spheres of influence we have. And so we all need to be taking these things really seriously, because if we don't, we're in for a world of hurt. And we've already got enough hurt going around. I don't think we need to pour kerosene on top of that. So, all right, those are the 10 questions for this week. Like I said, just as an update, what you can expect moving forward. Next week's going to be a little bit off. I will probably do a live stream next week. I'm going to do a little bit different for the Q&A. So if you enjoyed this, you can send me questions ahead of time. I will try and figure out a way to gather them if I can through all the different social media platforms and then curate them. And then we'll handle this again next week. But hopefully you enjoyed the Q&A. Hopefully you got something helpful out of it. My goal with this really is just to try and help people make sense of this and see around corners. That last point of like, what can I do or what can we do to avoid missing the point? That's part of what I'm really trying to accomplish here, is to just encourage people to slow down and help people do that and help them see things just through a different lens. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm not saying you have to agree with me. I just want you to at least be thinking and ensure that the decisions you're making, you've put some critical thought into it and you understand why you're doing what you're doing. Because if you don't, you're in for a world of hurt. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your Friday, an awesome weekend. And we will see you on the other side.